Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council briefing. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and welcome you all here. For those who are not regular attendees, this is a briefing where we have questions and answers. We do have public question time at the beginning of the briefing, and the remainder of the meeting is a time where council members ask questions or seek further information on reports provided to us. So this is not a decision-making meeting. That happens at the council meeting next Tuesday night. Same agenda, but the decisions are made there. I would just like to let you know that we do have a couple of apologies this evening. We do have Councillor Toppelberg and Councillor Gontaszewski on approved leave of absences, and we have apologies from Councillor Dan Loden this evening. Councillor Ashley Wallace is joining us via Zoom this evening, and Councillor Sally Smith is due but is having issues with traffic. So we do have enough for a quorum and we will start the meeting. And that then takes us to public question time. So I'd like to invite you to make statements or ask questions of council. We take those questions and we will ask them at the time that we're dealing with a particular item. There's no set order. We just ask that you come up to the microphone, that you state your name, the suburb in which you live, and we do ask that you stick to 3 minutes, and the CEO does time. So whoever would like to go first is very welcome.
Hi, I'm Paul Delanzo of Leederville. Just wanted to probably make more statements and ask questions of a development at 14 Franklin Street. The statement I want to make is basically the developer's a profit developer looking to make money out of a piece of land. The council's got a professional crew of planners who are very experienced in development and know all the ins and outs. The developer's employed Urbanista and a whole range of really strong experts knowing what they're talking about. Then you've got little old me who lives next door who has no clue what place development and all that other garbage means. So I've done my best to look at the plans in an objective way because we want development, because Vincent lived next door for 100 years and it looks terrible. But we were completely ignored in any of the feedback. All the neighbours objected to overlooking issues and not one of those was taken into consideration. And of course, the planning people have now achieved what they wanted to on the council's behalf as far as changing. The developer's Urbanista guy has come back and basically put a middle finger up to everything that we objected to. And mate, I've lived in the street since 1991 and I don't want people looking in my backyard. I sunbake in the Nick, I swim in my pool in the Nick, and now I've got bedroom windows that are going to look straight into my backyard. So we objected to that and basically it's deemed to comply, whatever that rubbish means. So really the council members are here to protect the local residents, not developers. So we would just like something done about the overlooking windows that look into my backyard. The other concern I have is you've got two massive houses at the front and now one massive house that's going to be in our backyard. We've enjoyed an open backyard for a long time. We've asked for them to push the house back a little bit because, like it or not, we're not going to get any sea breeze anymore because you're going to have three massive houses blocking all the airflow to our property. So a little bit of compliance to push those houses back. They say it complies because we can put windows and paint it different colours. But unless you're using invisible ink, the house is not going to disappear with a few windows and some pretty paint. So, we're just asking for a little bit. We've actually supported the development in a lot of ways. We've supported the developer with parking at the front of the houses because the street's full of cars as it is, and there's going to be even more cars now. But we've given a lot to them to support them, but we've had a middle finger stuck up with us with our concerns. So as local residents, we'd just like a bit of support from the councillors. Thank you.
Before you head off, so can you just repeat your name for me?
Paul Delanzo.
And Paul, which side are you on to the development?
I'm 12 Franklin Street, 12. So I'm on the eastern side. Thanks,
Paul.
No worries.
Next speaker, please.
Yeah, I'll just ditto and reiterate Paul's. My name is Craig Belcher. I live at 12A Franklin Street, which is directly on the eastern boundary of this development site. I'm also a local business owner that's been in the area for a long, long time as well, and totally support what the council's been doing with regards to the Leederville master plan, etc. Now it comes down to just having a little bit of balance with regards to what we're going to do with some of these residencies. The block next door is an 880 square metre block, which now we're trying to squash 3 double-storey homes in. Being on the eastern boundary, my major concern is, and as Paul said, we're totally for this development. We believe, if anything, it should be split down the middle and like the rest of the street, but now they're trying to squash that third unit out the back. And the biggest problem we do have is, as Paul said, not only windows and overlooking and disturbing the amenity, in particular our amenities of our backyards, especially as we gear in towards retirement, this really destroys my amenity next door. And in the 130-page document that we've done, that the developers have done, Urbanista have done with the town planners, they use key words like, and they're talking about me as a neighbour, that this will have moderate impact, this will have minimal impact, this has no significant impact. Let me tell you, this devastates my way of life, my wife's way of life. She's devastated about this. And to try and rubber stamp this over by saying that, pardon me, this will have no impact because we're going to change the colours or possibly put a window there. I'm going to have a two-storey brick fence, sorry, a two-storey building home about 2 metres from where I eat breakfast every day. I've completely lost all sight of any trees on the left-hand side of my backyard now because they want to build a two-storey, I should say try and squash in a two-storey home in this back block. I'm all for the development of the site. It certainly needs to be done, but surely we need to have balance between at what cost to the amenity of the neighbour. This absolutely devastates me. It devastates my wife. And to use words in a report like it says, quote, no significant impact. That totally disgusts me. Surely we need to do something about this. Deemed to comply says 2.2 metres from the eastern boundary. We've got a 130-page document that's trying to find an excuse to build it 1 metre from my side fence. So I'm going to basically now sit out at my little backyard and have a look at a two-storey building 1 metre from my fence. It's an absolute disgrace and it breaks my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Stephen DiPiazzi. I'm from Stirling, but I represent the developer for this development at 14 Franklin Street. So I'm from Urbanista Town Planning and representing them. I guess we'd just like to give a little bit of background on the application, being that this has been in the process of development with the council for over 6 months. There's been numerous back and forth and significant design revisions as part of that process. We've had feedback from adjoining property owners in addition to the city, and the application's also gone through the city's design review panel for further feedback on improvements and ways that we can mitigate the concerns that have come up and that have been identified. Ultimately, what we've achieved now, and you'll see this in the attachments of the report, attachment 2 and 3, which show the perspectives and the finishes of the building, how it appears. The building is actually very visually attractive now, significantly contributes to the streetscape, and we also believe that it doesn't really have any undue impact in the context of an R30 coded residential area where this type of development would be expected. Some of the finishes which have been incorporated into the facade include wood finish aluminium cladding, feature red brickwork with perforations utilising recycled bricks, cement data render, exposed black steel beams, black vertical slats for privacy screening, and planter boxes, which have also been incorporated into the upper level. That's in addition to the trees and vegetation which is provided at the ground level. The dwellings will make a substantial contribution to the streetscape. The existing development on site is a dilapidated single house which contributes nothing. I would have suggested actually detracts. There is obviously concerns with the intensification of the site, but the site currently is significantly underdeveloped. So the intensification is to be expected as the area transitions. I will acknowledge the concerns of the adjoining property owners. There are a few matters which were brought up in the consultation period. Most of these, as has been mentioned, do comply. And so that will mean that it is at an acceptable standard and it's in line with what's expected for the area. The key items which there is discretion sought, which there were concerns around, the lot boundary setbacks. So there is a setback variation to the east, well, northeast. So effectively, there is no overshadowing impact as a result of that. And it's more of a visual impact. In terms of ventilation, if you're setting back a building at 1 metre from another building which has another metre setback. Generally, you're not going to have any undue impact on ventilation. The design review panel provided advice on changes to make to the facades to reduce that visual impact. All of those recommendations have been incorporated. We've definitely done everything we could to mitigate any potential impacts. The impact to the west, the 2.2 metre requirement is a result of a wall including a major opening. That is a ground floor wall, not the upper floor wall. The upper floor wall actually complies, and the major opening will be screened by the dividing fence. So it's rarely an unrealistic requirement. There was the garage dominance raised as another concern. That's been entirely addressed with the significant changes where the garage has effectively been converted to a carport.
You have reached your 3 minutes, so if you could just make your final comments, it'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Yep, and there was some concern in relation to retaining, about the lack of retaining. The intention was to retain that and reinforce it if required. And obviously, if retaining is required, that will be constructed under the building codes. In conclusion, the city supports it, the design review panel supports it. We've incorporated every recommendation, and we hope that council will also support it.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Leon Pericles. I come from East Perth on the river down there. I just want to ask permission to submit something to the council rather late that is going to probably be a little broader than the brief that describes the petition. And this is a new thing that's popped up and we haven't had much time to put this concept together, but we'll put it together and we'll submit it to you in a documentation before the end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. We look forward to receiving that document. Next speaker, please.
My name's John Hockley and I live at 3 Leslie Street, Mount Lawley, and I've been involved with the Banks Precinct Action Group for many years, along with Caroline Cohen. What we're here for today is to ask that you consider very carefully any move to demolish the hall completely on Banks Reserve. Doesn't seem as if it's in any urgent requirement in regard to asbestos and that, and people were using it quite a reasonable amount beforehand. What we would like to keep the community there. They do come to our meetings. We've had quite a few meetings over a number of years. And what we'd like to do, if possible, to keep some hall there, some rooms and facilities at Banks Reserve rather than just have an outdoor place where you sit down and put up with the weather. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer Highgate. It's about Banks Reserve Pavilion. The report went on to the website at about after 2:45. I only saw it at 4 o'clock, so many people won't know about it. The report says the pavilion is located in a riverbank flood zone. The likelihood of getting any DAs or building approval is very low. The building is located in what's called a flood fringe. It's the blue on this map, with part of it located in the floodway. The parts that's in the floodway is the toilet block area, a section that could and should be removed. Interestingly, part of the East Perth Power Station is also located in the flood fringe, the blue part. So somebody better tell Andrew Forrest and Kerry Stokes before they put money into that. Sure, take into account the 100-year flood, but don't use it as an excuse. One of the options in the report said they could keep the hall, add a toilet and a kitchenette at a cost of about $91,000. It seems eminently sensible. To put it in context, you have to remember the council approved a budget of about $250,000 to move the front counter from this building to the library, not to mention the money that was spent on the ghastly toilet that was installed at Banks Reserve. The report also refers to ageing and underutilised buildings. The pavilion is characterised as being underutilised, but the information provided the council on the 30th of May 2017 showed that at that time, the pavilion was the most utilised facility in Vincent, with a 39.37% utilisation rate. It used to be used by a dance school, It was then used by Kiddies Learning Hub, who were paying something like $53,000 a year, that's for 11 months, before they were booted out. That was enough to cover the running costs. It's well utilised before, it was well utilised before, it can be well used again with a bit of effort. The pavilion's also a mix of useful hall and useless rooms left over from when the original Sea Scouts were there. The hall has a great sprung floor and it's valuable for a number of uses. The dance, yoga, there's other uses as well. The Lycopodium condition assessment that the city undertook showed that apart from the electrical services, the conditions of that hall range from good to very good. It's quite interesting reading that. So the city has a design review panel whom I'm sure could contribute to take the useful bits of that building and make it even better. Leon Pericles has spoken previously. In the report, it indicates, or in his petition, it indicates that a number of people with a broad range of skills and experience are prepared to contribute to make the hall a valuable piece of infrastructure. And we have to appreciate that infrastructure is a great thing for building communities, sometimes referred to as a third place. Yet they need some infrastructure there. Leon obviously has a broad network of connections and you should use those connections. One last sentence. The city should be tapping into that network. It will make your job easier by working with the community rather than just for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I'm just speaking for the pavilion, which is actually a core to our community. It really...
Carolyn, we know you, but just for the record,
Of
if you
course,
wouldn't
I
mind stating your
apologise.
name and your suburb.
Gardner Street, East Perth, speaking to the pavilion. The pavilion has stood for a number of decades. It has had a lot of use over the years, and as Dudley has said, many of the points I was going to make, it has been the most used facility within the city of Vincent. Unfortunately, it is an old-fashioned looking building. Apparently it sits on a floodplain like the rest of Perth does. Interestingly, it has never been flooded. However, Banks Reserve is regularly flooded and it currently is flooded. This shouldn't be a reason for knocking down a perfectly adequate building. This building could have a creative and fabulous future use for our community. We've had many uses over the years, and it was very sad when the City of Vincent chose to not renew the lease that the little school had over this building. This lady is one of our community members, and she's now in a property on Beaufort Street. But this sort of invigorated, and I know it was termed a private use for this building, but these are children who live in this community, so it's also a community use. And this term private shouldn't preclude other uses that are private but involve community people. So I would plead for this rather unattractive, unassuming building. It is on the banks of the Swan River. It is an absolutely fabulous location with so much potential. And over the years, we have looked at various plans and models for things that could be done for it. So it takes a little bit of vision. But if we lose a building like this, there are so few community buildings left. So please reconsider. If it involves a rescission motion, so be it. But please do not knock down an adequate building that could, for a lesser amount of money than $2.5 million for a new place, be restored and reinvigorated. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight. And I come to you as a former hall user at Banks Reserve. I had been teaching at Banks for a couple of years and had a really good clientele.
Sorry, we do need name and suburb if you wouldn't mind. Thank
Wendy
you.
Herring. I actually live in Guildford, but as I said, I taught at Banks for a couple of years. There is no low-cost community halls available in this area. I've taught yoga in and around Mount Lawley for 12 years. I was at a church for 8 years, but as I said, I spent the last few years at Banks. During lockdown, I handed back my keys. At the end of June, when I was supposed to go back and teach again, I'd sent emails out to all my students saying that we could recommence after 14 weeks of doing online yoga. That worked well, but a couple of days before I was meant to pick up my keys, I got a phone call. It was about 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon, informing me that Banks was to be demolished and no one would be using the centre. This came as a big shock to me. I tried to find a venue, and as far as community sort of offering anything, most people that I rang didn't even return my call when I'd left a message on their machine. And most of the younger students work out of studios. All my friends and oldest people around the area that teach yoga have been set up in their various places for quite a few years. So there was nothing available. I no longer have that group of students. After 12 years of having that business, it no longer exists. And I actually feel really guilty that I don't have a venue, a space to teach these students. My eldest student was 88 years old and she used to walk to class. I taught a class for an hour and a half and charged $15, and most of my students are sort of 60 plus. I do believe Banks is same sort of vintage as me, and I'm certainly not ready to be knocked over or pushed down. 60 years old is not very old. And for me, as a 60-year-old woman now, to go out and find a job doing something else has been really difficult. I've lost my community. I feel really awful about that, and there's not a lot that I can actually do about it. So I'm just pleading with you from that grassroots kind of level. Decisions that you make really impact everyday people. And I still think about all the little children that used to spend time there walking around the river, putting their feet in the sand each afternoon. And I wonder what they're doing now. And these kids live in apartments. Do they have that connection with nature that they should be having? And, you know, my heart goes out to everyone that can't use this centre anymore. It's like the heart is being ripped out of the community. And to come up with nothing, just to say that you're not going to replace that hall, I just think it's not a great idea. So when you're making that decision next week, I want you to take a big breath in through your nose and out through your mouth so that you have a really clear head. Put your hand on your heart and make the decision that makes you feel good about yourself and your community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nick Cianci. I'm the adjoining landowner to the development on 14 Franklin Street, Leederville. So I'm just here to, I guess, share my views on the development, which I support in principle. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things that affect me, being the adjoining landowner on the western boundary. One thing is the lot boundary setback to the western boundary on the first floor. So there's a variation. Well, started with a variation of over a metre to the codes or to the built form policy, and now it's been reduced to 900 mil. So we're talking still over just under a metre variation to a lot boundary setback. Obviously, being a developer, you know, that's your agenda is not necessarily the neighbourhood or the adjoining landowners. It's obviously for the development, and I respect that. But a 900 mil variation is quite a lot, and obviously for me personally, it sets a precedence in terms of my future prospects to develop my site. So that's one issue with that. Another one, just in regards to that setback, the DRP member commented on the street setback in terms of darker colours not being preferred option in a Colorbond monument colour. But then, I guess in contradiction to that, has recommended a darker colour to the lot boundary setback to address the bulk and scale. And also there's been glazing added to that upper floor to assist in that lot boundary setback not being to be less bulk and scale, which is a bit concerning to me. I'm not sure where that information has been gathered. So what I'm trying to say is a lot boundary setback is what it is. It doesn't matter what colour it is, doesn't matter what glazing is there or not. It's still a wall. It doesn't matter the design of the wall. It's still a wall and it's still set back 900 mil. So I'll take that into consideration when I develop my property. The other one is retaining on the western boundary. So just in regards to that, just a second. So administration's response to my concerns with retaining on the existing boundary, it says, sorry, my eyesight's not the best. The applicant has confirmed that existing retaining wall along the western boundary subject site is proposed to be retained and strengthened if required by the building certifier. The demolition plan included in attachment 2 does not indicate that the existing retaining wall is proposed to be removed. So I'm assuming there's no adverse effect there. Then in contradiction to that from the DRP member, the response to that same query says retaining will be provided to address the level difference. All locations and heights have been indicated on the revised plans. Well, that's not the case because they're not on the plans. So just those two things to have a think about. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Are there any further speakers this evening?
My name is Angie Cassian from Joel Terrace in Mount Lawley. I'd like to speak for the Banks Reserve Community Hall to be kept, and I'd like Council to rescind their motion to demolish it. I've been a resident of that community for about 20 years, and I just support everything that all the other members have put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Are there any further speakers?
Good evening. My name is Erica Lozic and I'm from Gardner Street, East Perth. And I would like to speak about the pavilion in Banks Reserve. And again, I support what the other speakers have said. I have lived in the vicinity and my family has since I was a baby. The hall has been used for Scout Centre. My brother used to go there. My brother still lives in that area in Gardner Street. I think they had yoga classes there at some point, and we've had several functions there, including family christenings and special occasions. We've booked out the hall. It's also been a hub for the community get-togethers where people within the community can get together and speak about topics or use the facility. And I think that's very valuable for the immediate people. And I think it's the right size as well. I mean, if it was any bigger, it would be perhaps parking would be a problem and clustering, but it's just, if it were to be demolished, I think you'd find there'd be an emptiness in the area and people within the community won't be able to talk to each other or meet each other, even talk to each other in such a way as they can now. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Just calling for more speakers. Are there anyone else wishing to speak tonight? Yes.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Anton Flynn, residing at 7 Eden Street in West Perth. I'm from Subdivision Experts and I'm the development manager for 14 Franklin Street. And just to, I suppose, provide some comment on the proposed development there. So the initial application for development approval received significant community backlash. We believe we had 8 objections in total, and we've worked very, very hard in that interim period over the following 3 or 4 months to get to a result based on the advice of the design review panel and the city's officers that they felt addressed the community objection and the residents' objections. So if the councillors look to the original drawings and what is presented now, they'll see there has been significant change made. I have heard some direct objection from some of the neighbouring residents this evening, two of which I have been in touch with already directly by email in the past, so that there were some further complaints. I hope that the revised drawings in a deemed sense have managed to address some of those complaints, and certainly we're not trying to be dodgy developers or do something on the cheap. If there's retaining that has to happen over the course of the development, all those things will be addressed. As we see it though, the design outcome is significantly improved from the first design outcome that was proposed, and that which is not deemed to comply is certainly well supported by your own design review panel and your officers as a good design outcome. And we ask that the councillors consider that when there is a contentious development like this, where there has been some significant community objection, by the time we've gone to a second round of design, there has been reduced community objection and in fact an increase in the amount of applications or comment in support for the development. So I think we're on the right path, and I think it's really, really important that the directive of the design review panel should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just noting the design review panel is there to provide advice, but we do welcome and appreciate that advice. It's not a directive as such. Yep. Okay, are there any further speakers this evening? Come forward.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Benson from number 3 Gardner Street in East Perth. I just wanted to say a few brief things. Firstly, my understanding is that a council is elected by the people and it is supposed to work for the people. And it seems to me that at the moment, sadly, the council isn't listening to what the people want regarding the pavilion on the Banks Reserve in East Perth. It's been standing there for many, many years. Before that, there used to be a Sea Scout hall that used to be used purely by the Sea Scouts, but also for dances and for other occasions that the people in the area used. And my understanding also is that this hall has been upgraded some 4 years or 5 years ago, and money was spent on upgrading it so that it was safe for the children people or the childcare place to be utilising that facility. And there's numerous other ideas and suggestions and things that I could say about this particular building. It's structurally solid, it's sound, and it's been used for many, many purposes. One lady said it was used for yoga, it was used for drumming, percussioning, it was used for martial arts, it was used for seminars, various things. And at one stage there was used as a Sea Scout centre as well, where they used to have their jamborees and their regular meetings and as such. That's one issue. I went around this afternoon because I only found out about this particular meeting late yesterday evening. I went around just to see what the interest was like just in my street itself. And I've got 4 letters that were willingly signed by 4 people living in the street objecting to the pavilion to be bulldozed down. And one was saying that they actually have a church group that attends their particular house on a regular basis on a Sunday, and they were looking forward to using that pavilion for a place of worship on a Sunday morning. But now that it's locked up and it's not in use, they're very, very sad and disappointed that they can't use that. Other people that I was talking to were going to use it for the childcare facilities because they had talked to friends that in the past have used it for childcare and they thought it was wonderful. So I've got 3 letters here, which I got within 1 hour. Sorry, 4 letters, I stand corrected, from people in my street that are objecting to this pavilion to be bulldozed down. And that's just only in 1 hour because they didn't know that this was happening, this particular meeting was happening. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you take it on board, what I have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Can I just have an indication of who still wishes to speak during public question time? Just one more person. Yep, come forward.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Andrew Lozic. I live on Garner Street in East Perth, and I just wanted to express my views. I'm opposed to the development of the pavilion at Banks Reserve. I've been living in the area for 10 years, living on the street for 10 years. I use the park every day. And we've heard a lot about the community, and I do agree. I do think that that needs to be preserved as much as possible, and there's a lot that can be done with the building to promote more community use. It is a hub for that. It's what it's designed and built for. But I also just wanted to make mention as well of the natural ecology of the area. It is really quite rare these days to find underdeveloped or undeveloped, as you might speak, or perhaps you might even say it's a naturally developed state in which that park is in. I do fear that if we do develop and we go ahead and we try to push boundaries with the natural ecology, we might have other devastating occurrences with the flora and fauna. We were very delighted recently to see the upgrade of the playground. It looks and feels absolutely amazing, and it suits the area perfectly. I don't think the development will be suitable. I wanted to bring the attention that we have an erosion problem. It's because we have boats that come up and down the river up there in Banks Reserve and along the shoreline. Across the river, there's been an approval for a development at Belmont Racecourse, which is also going to have an impact to the area. And during the most recent changes that we had at the playground, there's been mature trees, and I don't know if anybody has noticed this, that hold back that shoreline, that sit there directly from where the pavilion sits to the bank, to the water's edge, that have been chainsawed down and replaced by eucalyptus saplings, which is really counterintuitive if you want to take into the damage that erosion is doing into the area. And tonight I just want to express my fears that if we go ahead and develop the area, if we take into account what happens when people perhaps make a difference to the natural standing state of the area because they've got chainsaws in their hands or bulldozers handy. So look forward to hearing your decision, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Given no one else indicated they wish to speak after Andrew, I'd just like to thank you all for your comments and thank you very much for coming this evening. You're very welcome to stay and listen to council members ask questions. There won't be any debate this evening. It'll just be limited to questions or foreshadowing amendments and business like that. And because we've had 2 items raised this evening, we'll go to those items first so that you don't have to sit around if you don't wish to, but of course you're very welcome if you enjoy watching council ask questions and see the process in action. Sometimes people think they just come for a short time, but somehow find this incredibly interesting and engaging, and we absolutely love that. So you're always welcome. So the first item, before we do that, I'll just check whether we have any public questions in writing this evening.
Through Mayor Cole.
Thank you. And any declarations of interest, CEO?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole. We have declarations of interest from Councillor Smith, an impartiality interest in relation to item 8.2, which is the report and minutes of the Audit Committee, noting that her husband is a member of the Audit Committee. Councillor Smith has also made impartiality declarations in relation to item 5.1, noting that Councillor Smith knows Paul Delanzo, a school parent through her son's junior and senior school years. Councillor Smith has declared impartiality interests in relation to item 7.1 on event and festival funding, noting that she knows Jimmy Murphy, from her involvement in Upbeat Events, which is the Soundscapes event, and worked with Susie Warner, director of Rev Film Festival from 2017 to 2019 at Upbeat Events, and both current members of the Arts Advisory Group. Councillor Fotakis has made a declaration of impartiality in relation to event and festival funding as well, noting in regards to the Soundscape event that Councillor Fotakis served on council with Jimmy Murphy, who is a band member of Soul Brothers, I might note that would be a interest in common with other
I
council
didn't
members.
think that I thought Soundscapes had already received funding. Is it part of the funding consideration?
It had been deferred from last financial year because I think it was rescheduled due to some COVID restrictions.
Thought that
Yeah, through
carried
you, Mayor Cole,
forward.
it's not part of the decision for
No,
tonight.
it's not. Yeah, it's not listed.
And I think that event was previously provided funding last financial year and it's been rescheduled into next financial year. So we just confirm if that's covered if that's relevant to the
I think we
report.
also dealt with this last time, and because we all obviously have an interest in common there, because Jimmy Murphy was a council member and we all served with him, but Jimmy was not the applicant in this matter.
And the only other aspect of that was Councillor Smith having previously worked at Upbeats events.
Yeah,
as opposed to-
apologies, Mayor Cole. Councillor Fotakis is correct. So the recommendation number 3 is that we're approving by absolute majority the Soundscapes event. So that's part
So
of
it's
the
been carried
recommendation.
forward to this financial year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. No worries.
We'll note in the declarations that applies to all council members. Councillor Fotakis declares in relation to Rev Film Festival that she serves on the Arts Advisory Working Group with one of the festival directors, Suzanne Warner. Mayor Cole, I've declared 2 interests. The first in relation to the petition on 7 Grand's Chicken, 2112-214 Lake Street, noting that I'm acquainted with one of the petitioners, and this report was authorised by the Executive Director and not by me. I also noted an impartiality interest in relation to item 7.1 on event and festival funding, noting that I'm a former board member of Open House Perth. I was not involved in the application assessment process and I did not authorise this report. That is the extent of the declarations I've received.
One more, CEO, just with regards to my impartiality interest with 5.1, having previously worked with the gentleman that spoke this evening, Mr. Paul DeLanzo, who's the owner of number 12 Franklin Street.
Sorry, Mayor Cole, yes, I do have that in writing from Councillor Fotakis that I just received as well.
Thank you very much, CEO. So we will move to the business for this evening. So the first item that was raised this evening during public question time was item 5.1, which is number 14 Franklin Street, Leederville, proposed 3 grouped dwellings. Council members, questions? No questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Through you, I just had a question regarding the average lot sizes that got approved for this site. I understand that the Planning Commission made the decision to approve this with an average lot size below what's required by the R codes. I was just wondering if we knew what the basis for that decision by the Planning Commission was and whether there were any conditions from that approval that affected the built form on it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct, Councillor Wallace, that the WA Planning Commission approved a subdivision for this site. There are minimum and average lot sizes to be achieved, and that's all set out in the state government's R codes. But ultimately, departures to that can be also approved by the WA Planning Commission. And in this instance, they did approve a departure to the average lot size. Minimum lot size is achieved. In doing that, there are a number of objectives or outcomes that need to be satisfied, the design principles in the R codes. And one of those relates to, less than 5% departure to the average lot size is acceptable. And on that basis, there is the head of power to approve departures. In terms of the actual decision itself, there is nothing that specifies the rationale as to how they arrived at that. So ultimately, it needed to be considered against those principles. And if the Commission was satisfied that it achieved those principles, then it can approve departures. So in terms of the conditions of the subdivision, I can take that on notice and check, but it is very uncommon to tie a subdivision approval to the specific built form outcome, but I can confirm that and advise in the briefing notes.
Any further questions, Councillor Wallace?
Thanks. Yeah, there was just a question from the gallery around overlooking. I was just wondering if APBIN could provide some further information on how that was assessed and what authority we have to impose conditions to further reduce overlooking.
Before we do go into your question, Councillor Wallace, I was also going to ask about lot sizes. Do you mind if I just pick up on that before we go to the overlooking issue? So I did notice on one of the subdivision plans it noted that this is R40 when it's actually R30, and the minimum and the lot sizes are around the 275 to 323. So I'm just interested, what is the minimum lot size for R30 in the R codes?
Yes, Mayor Cole, the minimum lot size in the R codes is 260 square metres.
For R30?
Correct.
So these are all larger than the minimum lot size?
Yes, it achieves the minimum lot size. Correct.
Appreciate that, but I can't take any comments from the audience if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Sorry?
Yes, Mayor Cole. So yes, they are larger than the minimum lot size, but as I mentioned, there is a departure to the average lot size of 300 square metres.
Okay, thank you. This wasn't in any way impacted by a subdivision plan that had R40 written on it?
To you, Mayor Cole, no, but I will check when I also confirm those conditions for Councillor Wallace.
Okay, so going back to Councillor Wallace's questions about overlooking, members of the public have raised questions from both the west side and the east.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. As outlined in the officer's report, there are two lot boundary departures, one to Unit 3, which is located to the rear, which faces onto the eastern side. And then there's also a lot boundary setback to the western lot boundary for Unit 1, which is located to the front or towards Franklin Street. Now, ultimately, the concerns that you've heard tonight and also captured in the objections and the summary of submissions relate to the imposition or the impact of or perceived impact of the windows that are proposed to these boundaries or these facades. I can confirm that in terms of overlooking and the deemed to comply standard, which is the starting point under the R codes, there are no departures to the deemed to comply standards for the windows being proposed. In fact, for the upper story openings, most of those are non-major openings, so they're not large enough to a livable space, or they are located in a way that they are appropriately set back from the boundary as per the deemed to comply standards. So there are concerns, as you've heard tonight, about perceived overlooking, but in terms of those openings themselves, they do comply with the deemed to comply standard.
Could you outline for the public gallery in layman's terms, layperson's terms, what deemed to comply means and whether council has any ability to seek to vary a provision that is deemed to comply?
Yes, Mayor Cole. So under the policy framework, the planning policy framework, there's a couple of routes that can be pursued in terms of getting an approval or an acceptable built form outcome. There's what we call the deemed to comply approach, which is basically prescribed standards, quantitative, that need to be satisfied. And the R codes basically say that where you meet those, the quantitative, then it is an acceptable built form outcome in relation to that specific design element. So if we're talking about lot boundary setbacks, then if you meet the deemed to comply in terms of the setbacks, for example, then it's considered an acceptable outcome in relation to that design element. The other pathway is, and it's no better or lesser, it's just a qualitative assessment against what we call the design principles. And ultimately they set out a number of outcomes that need to be achieved or considered. And where you satisfy those, and it's the qualitative assessment, so a judgment or discretion is sought, then it is also an acceptable outcome in relation to that particular design element. And ultimately you work through a number of design elements in the policy framework, and on balance, a decision needs to be made around the appropriateness of the entirety of the built form outcome. So we have spoken about specific design elements like boundary setbacks and overlooking, but ultimately the decision needs to be made about how the entire built form outcome is or is not appropriate or impactful, adversely impactful to adjoining properties in this context.
I did say laypersons. Once a planner, always a planner. What I was really asking is, if something is deemed to comply, but the council still thought, we don't really like that as an outcome and we think it could, we could actually make that setback further, or we could remove that window. Do we have the ability to do that, given we're making quasi-judicial planning decisions under the planning framework, including the state residential codes?
To you, Mayor Cole, yeah, so where you do satisfy those deemed to comply standards, it's considered acceptable, and on that basis there is no just planning grounds to require somebody or to compel somebody to exceed those. Where departures are sought to those, absolutely, I guess there needs to be a judgment made in terms of how you are offsetting those impacts, but where you do satisfy those deemed to comply standards, it's problematic under the planning framework to require a developer to exceed those.
So in short, we don't have the discretion to require that. Okay. The other thing is that the neighbours have raised, so for example, on the eastern boundary, talked about the deemed to comply setback being 2.2 metres, but that's been reduced to 1 metre. And then the applicant did talk about the fact that that's at the ground floor where the major opening is basically use the word shielded, or there is a planning word for this, but I'll just go with shielded by the fence. And then the neighbour on the western boundary had a concern about the 900 millimetre first floor setback. So just if you could go to those variations and talk about that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the word you were searching for was screened. That's the one. Yeah, ultimately the departure to the eastern boundary for Unit 3, it does relate to a portion of wall. It basically extends from the scullery, includes the kitchen and a portion of the alfresco. The alfresco area is open in terms of building bulk impact. It's open, so I guess less impactful than a solid wall. But the portion for the kitchen does have a major opening, so a large window, but effectively it is screened by the boundary fence. So on that basis, in terms of the impact of overlooking, that has been mitigated through that measure. In terms of the other concern around...
Before you move on from that one, I think the other concern that the neighbour is expressing is not just the overlooking, but also the bulk. So under that design pathway, do you believe the bulk has been mitigated to sort of reach that outcome?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we are of that view. The departure being sought is to the ground floor. In terms of how we undertook the assessment and the approach we took was to take that entire building facade, both ground floor and upper floor, liaise and work with the city's design review panel, ask the questions, also relayed the concerns raised by the adjoining properties because they are understood, and sought some feedback from our design review panel member who's an architect, and basically they provided some advice in terms of how you could reduce the impact of that overall building mass, because it's 2 stories, and that is adjacent to the outdoor living area for those adjoining properties. So that is recognised. So some of those suggestions from the design review panel. You've heard it tonight around colours and materials and breaking down building mass. An approach of that is to, incorporate different colours and materials and perhaps inclusion of windows and openings. Understanding the concerns around privacy, the incorporation of windows might not be the best approach in this instance, so that is granted and that is understood. But ultimately, the approach we took was to try to reduce that building mass, noting that that upper story building bulk is actually compliant with the deemed to comply standards for building setbacks to lot boundaries.
Just following up on that, it does seem that the window is now causing some concern to the neighbour, and that this was actually brought in to reduce the bulk, which is usually to the benefit of the neighbour. So I'm just wondering if it might be worth, before Tuesday's meeting next week, having a discussion with the applicant about that window.
Agreed, Mayor Cole. We have had those discussions throughout the course of the assessment. Having heard the discussion tonight and that suggestion, we will have that discussion again. Again, there's different approaches to address building bulk, but not at the cost of perceived overlooking. So perhaps there's a solution there, and we can provide some advice in the briefing notes. Again, the applicant would need to be supportive of those changes.
Thank you. And then the other issue raised by the neighbour on the western boundary was the retaining, and whether the retaining is or isn't happening. Is that something we could just get some clarification on?
Yes, Mayor Cole. The confusion that was raised tonight lies in which retaining you're referring to. So on the western boundary to the front portion, you've heard from the resident that is concerned that approximately 500 mil retaining that exists is going to be modified or removed. That is not changing. There's a note, there's an annotation on that elevation that actually says that to remain as is and improved as required. There are other portions of retaining wall on the property, and to navigate through the undulating site, I think there's about a 1.3 metre slope that affects this site. So to manage those slopes, there are retaining walls being proposed elsewhere on the property, and they have been specified with retaining wall heights. So that's probably the discrepancy that was raised tonight.
Thank you. So we talked about the setback on the west, but then in terms of the setback to the ground floor, we talked about that window opening, but the actual departure in terms of the wall being closer. So saying that the major opening on the east will be screened by the fence, but then the issue of that being 1 metre as opposed to 2.2. I think that's a concern for the neighbour that was raised tonight as well.
Yes, Mayor Cole. So that is the departure that has been identified in the officer's report. We've worked through those design principles that I referred to before, the qualitative, and ultimately those qualitative requirements relate to, again, breaking down building mass. I referred to a portion of that wall actually being an open alfresco structure, the colours and materials that are being carried through to that side. Majority of that would be screened by the dividing fence. In terms of impacts or planning related impacts around overshadowing and visual privacy, there's the screening from the dividing fence. In terms of overshadowing, it's located to the east. So in terms of impact, overshadowing would actually fall to the south. So these things have been worked through, and for those reasons, on balance, administration satisfied that it satisfies the design principles.
Okay. And then I think that concludes the questions asked from the gallery, but Councillor Hallett, you go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple are in relation to the landscaping. The loss of the pear tree in the back, is there scope for any additional tree planting to be included as conditions around the site or on the verge?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, there are trees being removed from the site. Ultimately, that is because there are constraints around the building and where it's located and driveway and providing access and such. The applicants provided a landscaping plan which proposes a number of trees in the front setback area towards Franklin Street, to the outdoor living areas for units 1 and 2 on the northern aspect, and then for unit 3 to the rear, they're proposing, or they would have 2 trees to that right of way outdoor living area as well. So in terms of clearing of the site, yes, trees are being removed. Is there an opportunity to provide additional street tree planting? I've preempted this question, and I can confirm that the advice that I did receive from our parks team is that to the eastern boundary, how do I describe this? Adjacent to the Unit 2 crossover, there is no capacity to provide a street tree on that side. It's limited because of the adjoining crossover for that property. But to the western boundary, I will ask that question and see if there's an opportunity there and provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. And just in terms of the jacarandas, was there any discussion between admin and the developer around what outcomes could be achieved through the tree selection tool and whether Indigenous species were advised? And if not, is that not a discussion that happens? And then a broader question. We've had feedback from administration a few times around tree selection for street trees based on other existing trees in the area, and just wondering what kind of, what would be required to shift the weighting in the tree selection process so that just because another species already exists in the street automatically overrides what would be spit out of the tree selection tool.
McCall, I can't answer that question right now, but I can go back to the parks team and ask that question. I think what they tend to do is exert some common sense. If there's all jacarandas in the street, you know, and there's infill trees, they'll try and make it sort of match up. But I'll ask them that question.
Anything further, Councillor Hallett? Councillors? I have a question about the carport / garages. They're very interesting in that they're sort of described as interchangeably as both, and I know the report talks about that they're open on 2 sides. But I just wonder whether this was discussed in any great length, given that we've had such a strong position on dominance of garages and recently taken something all the way through SAT judicial review. I just wanted to ensure that, you know, we've seen visuals of a structure that does look rather garage-like but without a door. Once 2 cars are parked in there, I still have some concern that that could present as quite a dominant car parking structure in the front of the building. So just seeking a bit more information as to, you know, how it was come to a decision that 70.9% of the lot width was acceptable.
Yes, Mayor Cole. So we are understanding of the changes that have been made to the city's built form policy to address dominance of garages and its width, particularly on narrow lot products. There's probably 2 key considerations in terms of its acceptability. One is its design, specifically, yes, it is enclosed on those sides, 2.5 sides. How it presents in the street, it is open, that is conditioned or recommended for a condition of approval to ensure that there is no garage doors to be installed. And from that perspective, it would present open in nature and an appropriate outcome in terms of impact to the street, because quite often the impact is from the garage doors and its dominance in terms of how much lot width it would occupy. The second key consideration is you need to appreciate and consider the existing streetscape as well as the future desired streetscape. So if you look at this portion of Franklin Street, immediately to the east, you've got double width garage doors in a 2-story lot product, narrow product. That's not to say that that is the desired outcome, but in the streetscape, and that's an example, but there are other examples where you've got varying forms of lot typologies, narrow lot products, as well as carports that are open and within the street setback, and also garages that occupy greater than 50%. So on balance, again, in terms of its appropriateness, it was considered appropriate in this context for those reasons.
I guess when I looked at the elevations, it was difficult to see the openness. I don't know if that's something that could be presented more clearly. I'm just concerned that we could have this situation where we start having quasi garages that are quite wide on narrow lots, and that this is a sort of a new way of presenting, partially as a garage, partially as a carport. So I think this is something that we need to be quite sure about, given the changes we've made to the built form policy, etc. So I guess the question is there any other way to really understand where that 2.5 walls, it's just a little bit tricky to see that in the plans and the elevations provided. I just want to be absolutely sure about what it is we're approving here.
Suggestion, Mayor Cole, is perhaps we can liaise with the applicant and see if there were any supporting diagrams or perspectives that could better describe what they're seeking, and that may assist in decision making.
Yeah, I think describe and demonstrate the openness, given that this is something that is being treated quite significantly at the City of Vincent in other matters and in fairness to other former applicants. Are there any other questions, councillors? Thank you very much, Manager. Oh, Councillor Fotakis.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to touch on, there was the point, and I think it does relate through to the assessment on bulk and scarp, but one of the comments that came from the gallery was the impact on cross-flow ventilation and, to their property. So I just want to get a comment on how that was factored into the assessment.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of cross-flow ventilation, that's about building separation, and there's some boundary walls being proposed on the ground floor, but in terms of setbacks to the ground floor, as well as the upper floors for units 1, 2 and 3, it does still provide for cross-flow and ventilation.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you very much, Manager. We'll leave strategy and development for the time being, and we'll go to item 6.3, which was the other item raised by members of the public gallery this evening. This is a late item, and we have only just received the report at 2:45, as mentioned this afternoon. So I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to read that, but we are familiar with the issues. And the item is late response to petition demolition of Banks Reserve Pavilion. Questions, council members? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, I have had a chance to look at the report, and I suppose I've got a couple of requests for when this is presented to council next week at the meeting. If possible, it would be good if we could have quite a lot more detail, particularly setting out the history of how this item has been considered in the Banks Reserve Master Plan over the several times it's come before council. There are a couple of comments there that I just wanted to clarify. In particular, the report mentions retention and upgrade of the existing building was not reconsidered as a feasible long-term option. I don't think that's a correct classification of the conversation that had been had at council, and I think that implies that it hasn't been considered. So I'm just, I guess, requesting some clearer language in relation to the considerations that council made and then the conclusions that we've landed on. I also wanted to ask, there was a mention in the gallery about mature trees having been cut down in the park and the impact on the erosion in the park. And I'm just wondering if you can give any detail about what's happened there.
Through Macaulay, I will need to check that. I think some trees have been removed. I think from memory they were invasive species that were removed. So, and I believe that was around the time that we did the playground. So not in relation to this building at all. But I'll check that and I can put that in the briefing notes. In terms of the first clarification, the sentence about retention upgrade was not reconsidered. I mean, I can sharpen that sentence up. That means reconsidered as part of the additional work we did following the public meeting, not that it was never considered, if that makes sense, but I can sharpen up that wording because I know it was considered as part of the Bank's Reserve Master
Thank
Plan.
you. Yes,
I take the point.
Yes, that's what I was hoping, that it would better reflect the discussion. And I think that we could do with a fair bit more detail that ties it back to the original council reports and decisions that were made, so that it's quite clear how this item has progressed. That's really all I have in terms of questions. I'll have some comments next week.
Councillor Hallett.
I'm just wondering if you could comment broadly about, I guess, letting community members know about tonight and the report, but just also there was a comment from the public gallery from the yoga teacher around going to book the space and then finding out that it couldn't be used. Just wondering what kind of communication was had with users historically of the space.
Yeah, through my call. So that's not a matter that would have been handled by infrastructure, but I'll go and ask the question and I'll put a bit more information out in the briefing notes.
Through your Mayor Cole, just to clarify the nature of the report, we did receive the petition from Mr. Pericles last week, and the normal process would be that we would submit the petition to the council meeting next week on the Tuesday, and then council would then consider how to respond to that petition and whether council wanted to receive that petition or request a report on the petition. The petition has been collecting signatures for some time. The reason why we put a report together in advance of council receiving the petition is that we had provided public notice about the demolition of the pavilion, and that went out to the community and on the website and in the local newspaper. And then we received the petition following that public notice. So in order to, because the information and work had been done and we were aware of some of the concerns of the petition, we've put a report together for the council meeting in advance of council deciding whether or not to receive that petition next week, to enable council to form a view on how to respond to that petition.
Thank you. And I'm aware from email correspondence today that there was also an email list of people that wasn't perhaps complete. So if we can just find out some more information about how that occurred. And then just one other question, which may also not be for this director, but if it can be taken on notice. It's not mentioned in the specific petition, but I've had some correspondence connected to it around the potential of a women's shed in Vincent. And just wondering if it's possible to get some commentary in the briefing notes of whether something like that could be possible without the current pavilion building being maintained in whole or in part, and whether alternative locations in the city might be possible.
Through Matt Cole, if I can just address the email list, we sent an update to approximately 150 people about the briefing session tonight and the meeting coming up next week. There were 8 people missed from that list who had attended the Q&A session, but their names were inadvertently not recorded on the electronic database that we use. So they've been added, and we'll send them an update saying that the report will be presented to the meeting next week.
Councillors? Councillor Fotakis?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's just following on from the point that Councillor Castle raised with regards to the brevity of the report. And I think there's a lot more detail that has certainly from correspondence from staff and points that have been raised previously that I think should be included in this report. And there are a lot of issues that really went to informing decisions made in the past. And some of those, I think, with regards to the use of the hall and, data that was collected before. And I think why there was a difference in assessing commercial use, so use of that facility as a commercial enterprise versus community use, and maybe even some commentary from staff as to what you see as the difference between the two when you form those assessments.
Through Mayor Cole, I might just quickly briefly comment on Councillor Hallett's question about the proposal for a women's shed. We support a men's shed in the city of
Before you do that, CEO, Councillor Fotakis has just raised a question. Perhaps we could deal with that first and then go back to Jonathan.
Okay. Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can add some more of the background information on Council's consideration of the Banks Reserve Master Plan 2.5 years ago, and we do have the history of those meeting dates, which we can include in the report. And there is the recording and live stream of Council's questions 2.5 years ago, and the discussion and adoption of the Banks Reserve Master Plan about the future of the pavilion, which we can include in an attachment to the report. We can also provide that additional information on the utilisation of the reserve of the pavilion by different user groups up until its recent closure.
So thank you, Mayor. Through you, I did raise the question of really when we're assessing this, and I think from the gallery they did raise various uses as community use, which seemed to differ from administration's assessment of that. So I did want to ask you to provide that opportunity, a little bit more clarity, certainly for the community members that are here as to those different forms of usage of the hall as well.
Through Mayor Cole, could I just clarify from Councillor Fotakis, there was a question about other venues within the City of Vincent to book for community uses, and there's an issue around the cost of that, and we've got a large number of halls and venues which are available to be booked at a very modest cost for yoga and for dancing or other community groups, including church group meetings, including our community centre.
Yes, the CEO, it was more sort of raising the points raised as to various uses that have or activities that have been undergone in that hall. And I know when we did the assessment previously and took into account the use or the lease that was given to the Montessori school, was really what is the difference from a community member's perspective, and certainly from the city's assessment when we've assess the use of all of our facilities is where did the thinking come from, the difference on a commercial use versus a community use, and just a little bit of clarification whether you or the director can provide that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to provide a bit of a summary of the utilisation of Banks Pavilion. I think we've got something that shows sort of the 3 years prior to it being closed, what it was being used for. It was certainly running at about $40,000 a year loss from memory in terms of the maintenance versus the revenue. And that's before any capital upgrades, but I'm very happy to pull together a bit of a summary of that.
Thank you, Director. That's the sort of information we definitely need in this report, as well as it would be good to get a sort of overview of what facilities we have that has capacity, because a lot of our halls do have capacity, and where they could be better utilised as well. Sarah, you were going to respond on the issue of the women's shed.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a note and comment that we do have an existing relationship with the men's shed in Woodville Reserve. We haven't actively, we don't have a formal proposal, and we haven't actively pursued whether or not there's a alternative site in the city of Vincent for a women's shed, the size and scale of that and the ideal location and what the arrangements would be. So we don't have a proposal to respond to at this stage, but we're supportive of obviously any initiatives which promote community connection.
Councillor Wallace, did you have your hand up? No. Okay, just going to the issue of the brevity of the report. I would like to seek, in addition to the information that's been sought already, there's a lot of information that has already been provided to members of the public. This should be the one-stop shop for everybody to see the information presented together. So I think it has been discussed that, or questions have been asked about going back to the history of the master planning, where the consideration of the pavilion was part of that, that this was a report that was approved to advertise on the 13th of November 2018, deferred on the 11th of December 2018 for further consultation, and at that time council sought further information be included on the pavilion, and that information really needs to go to the condition of the pavilion, the use of the pavilion, the issues in terms of location, asbestos, etc., the costings that were put to council at that time. So there's a lot of information that just needs to be in one place, and it needs to be in this report. So that's part of it, as well as where in the master plan the consideration of the pavilion was considered. And I think it also needs to discuss the plaza development in a little bit more detail in terms of what's proposed. And information around if the building, we've got the sort of options presented, but perhaps some more information in relation to this issue of it being in floodway, part floodway, part potentially not. I just think that information needs to be really provided much more comprehensively within this report, and it's all available, it's all been presented and discussed. So I'd love to see it in the one location. I think it's a good idea to provide links to the previous debates from council meetings, and to include relevant documentation from the Banks Reserve Master Plan, including what the proposal is in its place, noting now that council has before us a decision to make on provision of a community meeting space in response to the feedback that's been received. And then we are also expecting a submission from Mr. Pericles in relation to potential uses by the end of this week. So we'd also need the report to respond to what's presented in relation to what is put forward and what is possible. So hopefully we'll see a much more chunky report coming back to us next Tuesday.
Through Mayor Cole, just to respond to one particular issue, which is a question from the public gallery about rescission of a council decision. This process and the report and then the petition really goes back to the council decision to adopt the Banks Reserve Master Plan, which was the master plan in its entirety following the extensive public consultation. So there wasn't one decision for council or a council decision specific to demolishing this pavilion on this particular date. Essentially, the rationalisation of this building in order to commence the implementation of the plaza concept is embedded in the master plan and the plaza concept. The if there was a council decision around demolition specifically, it would really relate to the capital works budget and the funding in order to pay for the rationalisation of this building as in order to help progress the implementation of the Banks Reserve Master Plan. But there's not one council decision or date to be rescinded. It really relates to the Banks Reserve Master Plan.
Thank you, CEO. In relation to information sought, I also would like to see some information around communication to the community on this in relation to invitations to the Q&A session, the information bulletin that was sent notifying of demolition, how far that was distributed, because we also need to be we need to demonstrate how far community awareness has been sought on this issue. So if we could also have some details around most recent mail outs, including responses to the people that attended the Q&A session, and we need to have in the report the fact that 8 people were missed but have now been contacted. Any further questions? Okay, just going to check my notes here for any particular issues that have been missed. There is comment from Mr. Meyer that the pavilion was the most used in Vincent and that the Lycopodium assessment said that the facility was in good to very good condition. So we just probably need some response on that too. And yeah, if we could have I do understand the issue of the tree removal was linked to invasive species and was cleared by the department DBCA. But if we could also just have that noted in the report as well. Thank you. Okay, unless there are any further questions, we'll move on. But you're very welcome to return next Tuesday, and we do thank you very much for your comments. Okay, so next item, we'll go back to the beginning of the agenda for the items that we haven't yet dealt with. So the next item is 5.2, Draft Woodville Reserve Landscape Plan. Any questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just with regards to the report on page 3 of the report, it's page 111 of the agenda, refers to, with regards to the lease arrangements, that it's currently untenanted, but looking through my records, September of last year, Council approved a 1-year lease to the Whadjuk Northside Aboriginal Corporation. So I just want to get some clarity as to what's happened with that lease, and certainly from my point of view, why Council weren't advised and why it's not reflected in the report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can respond to that. So yes, you're correct, Councillor Fotakis. There is a council resolution to approve a 1-year lease for the Whadjuk Noongar group. That lease was sitting with the community group for a fair period of time. We were awaiting their signature. We only just received it in the last couple of weeks, and it has been signed off now by all parties, including the CEO. And I suspect that the reason it's not reflected in that report is because it has only recently come through in the last week or two, that the author of that report, who sits in another area, was unaware that it had come through. So it's just a bit of a timing difference there, but it definitely has been approved.
So can we actually have the report corrected to reflect that? And I think that would also, I suppose, allay any concerns from other groups and other community members who did have an interest in that facility.
Councillors, Woodville Landscape Plan. I just wanted to ask a question around consultation, and given that we have a limited budget, proposed for this, just to be understanding that that would be put, that this is a low cost exercise, and that when we're seeking feedback that we're pretty clear about what it is that we can and can't finance.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, we would be doing that through the consultation by making it quite clear that this is an interim solution, the landscape plan, ahead of having more details for a future master plan, which is now, if this was to go ahead, be postponed. So we plan to do that through that way.
So would, for example, the consultation say that the objectives for a landscape plan are to improve planting, seating and access, and not to consider equipment and built form?
To you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. We'll be clear that there will be no built form changes for the landscape plan.
Okay, thank you. And just in relation to the southern car park improvements, there is landscaping. Was there going to be anything done to the surface or tidying? I mean, even just where it's got sort of trees in the middle of the car park, it all presents pretty roughly. Like, is there sort of, you know, even to sort of provide some kind of garden bed around those central trees or something to make it look or present less like a burnout space potentially?
To you, Mayor Cole, this is definitely something that was discussed with the key users of the site. The preference was not to formalise the car park to ensure it can be continued to accommodate the various users and the various size vehicles. At the moment, members use it for overflow car parking, rubbish truck access, user bus parking, truck loading and a drop-off zone. So we could look at what is provided through the what we can provide through the community consultation by still enabling those users to occur.
Yeah, I don't think we need to formalise it. I'm just talking about the fact that there is some trees in the middle of the car park, and if we could maybe landscape around that and do something that at least made it look like it had a sort of nicer aesthetic, not just around the sides but in the middle, I think that could go a long way. And I do have other questions which are slightly related, but probably we'll kick in at a future meeting. It's really around the sports facilities plan timeframe, and the link to leasing arrangements, and just flagging that we're very appreciative of having a project management update on that in terms of timeframes and implications for leasing generally for community sporting groups, given we've just survived the community property management framework.
To you, Mayor Cole, we can bring the sport and recreation facilities plan to a separate meeting to discuss those timeframes and the impact that would have on leases.
Much appreciated, thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay, we'll move to item 5.3, response to petition relating to odour from 7 Grams Chicken, numbers 112 to 114 Lake Street, Perth. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I understand that this has come about, this is kind of the second phase of looking at this premises, because there was originally some complaints and then there was an update to their ventilation. I'm just wondering about, in the process of updating the ventilation to be compliant, does that mean that they're all completely compliant now? Because with the consultants, with the course of action that's been is proposed, the last bits require implementation of solutions and compliance with the building regulations. So I'm just wondering if they're already compliant and then there's recommendations out of that consultant, is there anything in there that we can actually enforce if it's beyond what's already compliant?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Even after they've installed the altered system with the increased height of the stack, which is what they did in May, even after that point in time, if we do identify a nuisance under the health local law, and if the only way to comply with that nuisance is to alter an already compliant ventilation system, then that can be an option to resolve the issue.
Cool, thank you. And while the consultant's specifically looking at this site context, given I'm presuming that we're getting the consultant for additional expertise, not just because of staff capacity, is there potential for the recommendations to be useful for conditions or refusal if similar premises are proposed elsewhere in the city near residential premises?
Through you, Michael, it really depends on the scenario. In this particular situation, 7 grams moved into the same premises where a previous restaurant was located, and it was operating within the approved use for that particular site. So that assessment wasn't actually happening at the DA stage. So it may be able to assist new applications, but if an application isn't required, then it wouldn't be assessed.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I found it really interesting that we have environmental odour consultants. So when I looked through that, the appointment of the consultant and the subsequent meetings with residents, what's the anticipated timeframe for that?
Through you, Michael, the consultant met with the residents and the city last week, and he obtained information to inform his testing over the coming weeks. So he is currently in the next 2 weeks doing the testing. He needs fine weather, so no rain, which does create limitations there. So then after that stage, he's able to provide recommendations. I would say probably what would be the lengthiest part of this would be to actually ensure those recommendations are implemented, that we have an outcome that's suitable for the residents.
Yes, Ms. Castle.
Thank you, Mayor.
I was going to call you Commissioner.
Sure, if you like. I'll take the upgrade. Just have a question in relation to the appointment of the consultant. Can you give us an estimation of the cost of that process and who's going to bear that cost? Is that the city's expense?
Yeah, through you, Michael, the costs are at the city's expense. We do have a consultancy budget. It could be anywhere around the ballpark figure of $5,000. It could be more or less. It depends on what the assessment requires.
Thank you. And just a clarification of Councillor Hallett's question, are you saying that if the results of this report are that the business is not compliant or is creating a nuisance, that our local law can actually impose a stricter standard than the Australian standard?
Through you, Michael, the local law does not go into the technical specifications as to what a ventilation system should look like. It just looks at the outcome as to whether there is a nuisance or not. So if there is a nuisance, then we would work with them to look at further technical changes to the ventilation system. So it's a separate sort of form of regulation from the Australian standard, which looks at the specifics of the technical aspect of the ventilation.
Thank you. I guess I'm just wondering if the business would have recourse if our conclusion is that while they might be compliant with the Australian standard, more needs to be done, whether they would argue that compliance with the standard should be enough.
Through you, Michael, I guess there's some specific aspects of the current system that have been looked at by the consultant and the city. I just think it depends on a case-by-case basis. I think whether you comply with one piece of legislation does not preclude you from being. I guess it doesn't give you immunity from complying with other pieces of legislation. So they're looked at from different angles.
Yes, keep going if you have further questions. No? Anyone else? I did have a question. When I read the report and it said this is what will happen, I just thought, because we don't deal with compliance as a council, I hope there's no inhibitor for this to just, we don't need to approve this course of action because this is compliance related. So I just wanted to ensure that this was moving forward and not waiting or being held back, and that this, is that the case?
To you, Nicole, that is the case. You'll notice that as it is a compliance case, I'm not going into the specifics of the evidence around this matter, but hopefully the purpose of this report is to just demonstrate that we do have a course of action in place and looking forward to achieving an outcome where everybody is as happy as possible.
That's fantastic. So just don't wait on us because we don't have any role to play other than to know what's going on. So if things are moving, that's fantastic. All right. Any further questions? Okay. We'll leave strategy and development for this evening and move to infrastructure environment number 6.1, tender on the supply and laying of curbing. Any questions? Councillor Loden's not here, but Councillor Hallett's going to ask a question.
Non-financial though. Through the Mayor to the Director. Given that environmental considerations aren't included in the tender criteria, is it administration's opinion that different providers do not differ in relation to the materials or process used?
Through my call, I believe so, and I'll check that and put it in the briefing notes. I think they use common materials and, it's a straightforward market, so, but I'll check that.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. Item 6.2, e-permits implementation progress report. Councillor Hallett.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the report states from the 1st of July, rangers will commence issuing infringement notices. Given that we've had 3 weeks now, and that is still a short amount of time, just wondering if we've got any information on how many infringements have been issued, if any, and have any been appealed?
Yes, my call. So this report was written at a point in time, but between now and next week, I can get that data and I can add it to the report. So I'll update the report with that data.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Fotakis, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just noting that there has been some concerns previously with regards to security of data. So I just wanted to know whether the recent audit by the Auditor Generals, and it may not have touched on this particular, I suppose, collection of data, but did it highlight any issues specifically with the security of data with the e-permit system?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that the OAG's performance audit on IT did not consider the permit system.
So in the page 1 of the report, which is page 124 of the agenda, so you're satisfied that that identifies that a review of the e-permit system against the Australian privacy principles, you regarding that as adequate?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is our own internal assessment. It wasn't an external auditor's assessment. And yes, we're satisfied.
Councillors, any further questions on the e-permit update? Okay. Community and business services. I'm sorry, we have a late report which has not yet been received in relation to a petition received at last month's OCM. This is item 6.4, response to petition on verge parking on Vincent Street at the 27th of July council meeting. Could I just ask when that report will be finalised and provided to council and community?
Yeah, through my call. So the report's being worked on, and the intention is to get it to next week's council. So it'll be published with the agenda later this week.
Friday, says the CEO. Thank you. I know we don't have a report, but I'll still ask, does anyone have any questions Yes, Councillor Vatakis.
So on that, how will people actually be informed that that the report is coming forward and will be considered next week?
Through Mayor Cole, will notify the lead petitioner once it has been approved and included on the agenda.
Has the lead petitioner been advised that it is a late item coming to council next Tuesday?
Through Mayor Cole, no, not yet.
Could that please happen at the earliest convenience?
No worries. Yeah, I'll let him know.
Thank you. Councillor Hallett.
Aside from the lead petitioner, would any of the other signatories be informed?
Through Mayor Cole, no.
Any further questions? Okay. Community and Business Services 7.1 Event and Festival Funding 21-22. Councillors. Councillor Hallett has his hand up.
Under the assessment criteria for accessible city, there is how will your event encourage smart travel? Just wondering what that means and whether we need one for future rounds that's more specifically related to encouraging active transport use.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, that is how it's interpreted, and I'm happy to recommend to the officers that we make that language a little bit clearer. Certainly when we're discussing with applicants, that's the kind of conversation that we have. It's about avoiding bringing in cars. It's about walking, cycling and using public transport.
Councillor Smith, you did, so you had a follow-up question? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, just a couple more. That possibly suggests an answer to the next one. In terms of the enhanced environment assessment, it asks how will your event minimise environmental impact? And so just wondering about, as part of the process, are there also clear requirements about not using single-use plastics, for example, or is it left to them to respond in an open way and then we assess it just based on what they've provided?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'm fairly sure that this is a summary and that there is detail there, and I'm certain that we are explaining to applicants that we are avoiding single-use plastics, and we're looking at opportunities to recycle and all of those sorts of behaviours that we encourage normally in the organisation.
Thank you. And just the last one, there's some separate tables with previous sponsorship included in the report, but would it be possible to have a single table with funding from the last few years, just so that we can be transparent about where we're providing recurring funding for events over an extended period?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I think we, so in the background, we've provided 1 year of history. So if I can clarify, we requesting that to extend to 2 or 3 years, something like that?
3 if possible.
3 years? Yeah, I'll certainly see what I can do.
Just if I can add to that, we did establish when Mick Quirk was the director that we were going to have cash and in kind, and that we sort of set that up, and that's something I'd really love to see continue. We could just have that factored into both previous and current application requests. Councillor Smith, you had some questions earlier in the week via email. Did you wish to follow up on those?
Yeah, thank you. I was just quickly reading my emails then just to see what response I was getting. Thank you, Mayor. So my main query is regarding the town team funding. And if I'm able to maybe shadow an amendment that we can have that amount changed from 30,000 to 60,000, which is what we were talking about before, that would be great. Thank you.
Also, just following on from that, we did discuss this as part of our budget process, and my understanding was that Kim & Co wasn't supported, given that we have a number of events happening at Hyde Park and that is not a community-driven event. So it wasn't perceived at that time to be of priority or best use of finances. So just flagging an amendment on the Sunday Common event also. And can we please have some information on how we will fund Pride Fair Day, both in kind and in cash? I note that Pride Fair Day potentially are looking at considering ticketless free event. So if we could just get some information in the briefing notes about how we'll factor in funding for Pride Fair Day, given now that that is going ahead. And also just in relation to extending the funding for town teams, and flagging that there should be some consideration for North Perth Common, North Perth Local and activating North Perth Common, Leederville Connect and activating Leederville Village Square. And also just interested to know, I know that the Pickle District's looking at some federal funding or alternate funding for their After Dark event, but I'd just like to know whether they intend to seek any support from us, because when looking at what we provided to those 3 town teams last year, that was 75,000. So just really to make sure that when we are making a decision about increasing funding to the town teams, that we will have capacity to pay for what it is they seek to do.
Yeah, Mayor Cole, if I could just make a quick response with regards to the Pride Fair Day. The staff have only met with the community group on Monday. And so they're still very much in the early stages of identifying what their requirements are, and us in terms of the city, even sort of quantifying what kind of support we can provide, either in kind or in cash. So I've made a couple of suggestions to staff as to how that might look, and they have gone back and had further conversations, but it might be a fraction too early for me to be able to define that. What I have done though is identified that we will set aside some funding through our community development budget, and we will deal with that as a community sponsorship as opposed to an event or festival funding request. So there will be sufficient funding for that particular highly valued event. And I suppose the other thing that I would mention in terms of the town teams, administration is very supportive of assisting our town teams. Very comfortable to support an amendment to increase that. I just want to also note that the officers have been having conversations with the town teams and encouraging them to apply for funding. But until such a time as we start to see that crystallise with applications, it's a little bit difficult to forecast what is actually occurring. And in fact, some of the elected members may have a little bit more information on that than we do at the moment, if you're in active conversations about what the town teams are proposing. So certainly very happy to support what comes through. Just a bit difficult to quantify it at the moment because we're not receiving that information through as an application at this stage.
Thank you, Director. Perhaps you could provide the support in kind and in dollars that we've previously provided to Pride WA for Pride Fair Day, noting it didn't happen last year, but in previous years. And if you could just advise how we will be advised of the final amount that's allocated. And in relation to town teams, hopefully our place managers or place planners are keeping in regular contact with them about what their plans are, but we'll just take as much information as we have to hand. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Fotakis?
Yeah, it was more, it was a question, but it's also too, noting that staff have only just met with the Pride group, but I'm just interested to know what contact had been made prior to that. Understanding, and you've recognised it as a very important relationship, but I also want to get some understanding as to, it's not that long between now and November. and I understand that we'll advise sort of staff that there were some quite substantial changes within their executive group this year. They've now appointed and funding a CEO, so that should go to really assisting them with their resourcing. So I want to get some understanding from, sort of future regular sort of points of contact. And I think sort of similar that we're doing with the town teams, but really also too wanting to get some understanding how we might be able to assist the town teams a lot more. They all, as not-for-profit sort of volunteer groups, struggle with resourcing. So I think if we could extend whatever support that we can to assist them, really be able to get their ideas into fruition.
So, Mayor Cole, if I could just respond to a couple of Councillor Fotakis's thoughts. With regards to our ongoing relationship and resourcing of our relationship of contact with Pride, we have actually identified a dedicated officer, part-time officer, who's working on the diversity, access and inclusion portfolio for this financial year. I won't mention the officer's name, but it is a highly regarded officer who worked on our youth action plan previously and has now moved across into this portfolio and has made contact with the key individuals and will set up a regular program of connection there. And with regards to the town teams, I have asked the marketing and events team to attend the roundtable meetings and to discuss with the town teams how we would like to support them, and also to make an offer of assistance in terms of event applications or even in event management. So we're very much on the trying to offer that assistance proactively, and we'll continue to do so. And I know there's a meeting coming up shortly where we'll be discussing the Christmas program, and my team's working quite a bit on that at the moment, and we'll be seeking the town team's involvement in that as well. So it's very much an active process, and if I would definitely encourage the town teams to make contact or to ask for assistance if they would like to know more.
Just on one point, can we maybe sort of have some communication that goes out that really touches on those points? That's one suggestion, please.
Councillors, any further questions on events funding? Okay. 7.2 investment report as at the 31st of May 21. Any questions? What's that?
As a councillor Loden area.
If you look at the divestment, it's correct. It's even more and more depressing. Okay, no questions. Okay, item 7.2, 7.3, financial statements as at the 31st of May 21. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes, councillor. I'll go to councillor Hallett and give you a break.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wondering, I'll ask a few and they can possibly be on notice anyway. How much is the fee charged by the Fines Enforcement Registry? When was the last time the city reviewed its communications in relation to enforcement and fines, so the actual text and formatting of letters and emails? And has there ever been a trial using behavioural economic theory to increase compliance?
Yeah. Some behavioural economic theory in terms of shaping behaviours in fines enforcement is my understanding of the question, and I'll certainly take that on notice. Thank you very much.
And just, is it possible to get a graph of unpaid infringements, like the amount over the last 5 years, only if that can be done with a few clicks of a mouse?
Through you, Mayor Cole, can I confirm in what period? So, for example, at this point in time, we're sitting at a 5% of unpaid rates at a particular point in time compared to 4% last year. So it is something that the shape changes over the year. And if we're focusing on rates versus other kinds of data, rates obviously being our major source of revenue and the one that we focus on primarily. So if I could clarify what you'd like.
More just unpaid fines rather than
Unpaid
rates.
fines.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. And it was over a 5-year period, if I can clarify, just what we can do. Okay. Okay.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just with regards to note 8 on page 56 of the individual report. Refers to a debt to Tennis West Seniors, WA of $5,728.25. And just want some clarity because I had thought that this particular group had been wound up, and what are the chances of the city actually receiving those funds?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor Cole, I'll confirm the details on that. Thank you.
Councillors, let's have a question in relation to the projected closing budget surplus for 2021, 5.16 million, of which 2.378 million is going towards carry forwards. And then it's 1.5 million in savings and underestimation of capital and operating projects carry forwards. Is that going into the asset sustainability reserve?
Can I just ask which page?
Page 2 of the report
Okay,
individually. So I'm now doing individual reports because it was just not working with the full report. Full agenda rather.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll confirm the actual figures with the Manager of Finance, Mayor Cole, if I could. My understanding is that there is a large number of carry forwards relating to capital and capital projects and programs. Our actual surplus, when that is all done and dusted, is sitting at around about $100,000, but I'll confirm the exact figures for you.
It does say carry forwards at the end, so I assume that's what's happening, but then it doesn't really say what the actual
so the
once carry forwards are taken into consideration, what's the closing budget surplus?
So on page 2, where it's got surplus position, as at 31st of May, the closing budget surplus is 135,441.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I read that as that was the forecast budget. My apologies.
That's okay. No problem.
Thank you. That explains that. Are there any further questions on the finances? No. Okay. Next item is 7.4, authorisation of expenditure for May 21. Any questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just with regards to a couple of items on there, there was a mention of Protector Fire Services, and I know that these are entered manually, but I think it's a typo referring that to temporary staff of engineering, and it's amount of 3,080, because as far as I know that Protector Fire Services do assessment rather than staffing, but if you could clarify that. There's also an entry for My Best Friend Vet Centre of 2,390. From memory, I've not noticed that our veterinary sort of costs have been that high, so maybe an explanation on that one. There's also a credit card payment for the CEO for a WELGA event that I attended. It does state 2 councillors, but in the interest of transparency, can my name be added to that as well, that I am one of those councillors?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll answer those in the briefings and make those amendments as requested.
Councillors, I just have a question on hire of portable toilets at Banks Reserve. Just interested. Did the motors get clogged up? I don't know. I'd like to know what happened.
No, so through you, Mayor Cole, we installed an additional toilet, temporary toilet for the summer period over the Christmas holidays. There was an additional toilet dropped in, which is now being removed. So that's what that was, in addition to the MODIS.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on? Okay. Chief Executive Officer items, 8.1, elected members' professional development for 2020-21. Any questions? Just had a question about, this is elected members' professional development for 2020-21, but then it had every single year. I'm just wondering if that's necessary if we're just dealing with the particular year.
Through Mayor Cole, no, it's not necessary. It's just necessary to report each financial year. I think that's just the entire register that's from our website.
Okay, well, it's available on the website, so perhaps we don't need to have every single year. Just doesn't really matter, but okay, any other questions? All right, 8.2, report and minutes of the audit committee meeting held on the 6th of July 2021.
Thank you, Mayor. Just mentions item 5.4, the audit committee to review. So just want to get an indication when that's intended to be presented to council.
Through Mayor Cole, the item 5.4 is planned to be discussed at the 3rd of August council workshop.
I did have a question about that too. I was just pondering that seemed to be discussed at an audit committee meeting where there was maybe one council member present and all community members who would have a financial interest in that item.
Through Mayor Cole, the nature of the discussion wasn't around, I suppose, whether we should or not reimburse the audit committee members or the number composition. It was more just getting a feel for those sitting members and whether that would have an impact on their desire to renominate or not. I thought that would just help us with our future discussions with council.
Did that not present as a financial interest for those members that they were discussing their own potential remuneration?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, it is an interest, of course. Although there's no decision being made in that case. So what we actually wanted was just the opinions of those individual members. So in that case, the interest is really explained through that.
Just flagging, I have an issue with that. It shouldn't have been. It should be discussed with council, who's the decision maker, and not those that will be remunerated if the decision is made that way. Anyway, perhaps we could seek some governance advice on that one. Any further questions on the audit committee minutes? Okay, moving on to 8.3, information bulletin. Councillor Hallett.
Just in the STAG minutes, there's a reference to the Future Climate Technology Review and an action to present this as a report to council for noting to enable it to be on the public record for interested community members. Just wondering if there's a timeline for that.
Yeah, through Mayor Cole, I'll check that and put it in the briefing notes.
Councillor Fotakis.
Just with regards to the information bulletin, register of petitions, 7 grams chicken. I think we need to actually maybe correct that and change that's coming to the July meeting. And can I get an indication when the petition regarding Camellia Street, when is that due?
Do you mean Camellia Street? Do you mean Forest Street? Oh no, Camellia Street. I think, did we accept that petition and seek for it to be considered as part of the North Perth traffic calming project? I think that was my recollection. But when is that report due to council, the North Perth traffic calming proposal?
Mayor Cole, I'm aware there was a public meeting and there's more work being done. So not this council, but the council after. So in August is the intention.
Does that help, Councillor Fotakis? And there is also an outstanding petition on Forest Street, but we are going to go meet with the residents on Saturday to discuss. So that wasn't going to be ready for this month, but I'm assuming for August. Okay, Director?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yep, that is the intention, depending on what happens on the weekend at the meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions on the information bulletin? Councillor Wallace?
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Just on the street tree removal report, looks like it was last updated on the 5th of January. So I was just wondering if we could get a further update on that.
Yes, Mayor Cole, I'll check that. I know we do a quarterly report now, not a monthly report, so I'll check that detail and make sure it's the right one.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on the info bulletin? Our last item for the evening. Okay, thank you. So given we have no further business this evening, I will close the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance, a small but active group. Thank you to administration, and we'll see you next Tuesday, closing the meeting at 8:15 p.m.